Oof, what do we have here? Now, if you watched my reduced lap time video, you heard exactly what this sounds like in a running car. And if you didn't watch the last video, well, you just missed out. I'm just kidding, here it goes. That's right, team. Benji's turbo took a dump. And I can't say that I'm happy about it, but you know that whole thing about making lemonade out of lemons? So now is a great time to talk about turbo issues, failure, and what to do if you find yourself in these situations. Okay, so did you win the What's That Sound game? If you did, congratulations. And the rest of you will just have to try again next time. And don't worry, when you're racing, you're bound to play What's That Sound a couple times. So just stay tuned. And aside from that, I hope the team is doing great and I hope your projects are coming along. How I handle this subject will be split into 2 videos because there's a lot to cover. This video will cover what happened and what to do before replacing the turbo. And the other video will be a detailed removal and installation video, regardless of what happened before you replace the turbo. Now, of course, there are timestamps in the description for you to reference. So let's get to it. When you're driving and you hear a funny noise and the car starts running weird, the first thing you want to do is turn on your hazards and find a safe place to pull over. Luckily for me, my failure happened on the track, which means I can signal for a red flag to stop traffic, or I can pull into the paddocks. In my opinion, those are way better than dealing with regular traffic and finding a parking lot, gas station, or even worse, the side of the road to stop. Specifically with turbo or boost issues, sometimes it's hard to tell what the problem is. When it first happened, I thought the transmission quit. 1, because I'm expecting it to go. 2, the mechanical noise, and 3, I had almost no acceleration. Once I felt that the shift and clutch engagement were smooth, I knew it was a boost problem. With blown pipes or clamps, the car will run rough and want to stall out because you will have unmetered air going into the engine. And depending where you are and your ability to diagnose/fix cars, you might be able to limp home or fix the issue in the parking lot. Old Benji's engine was running relatively fine, and this is where gauges had their time to shine. From my gauges, I can tell my RPMs and fluid temps were normal. No lights were in the dash, no smoke or fire, but my boost would not come out of vacuum, and the noise rose with my RPMs. All these observations were made before I made it into the pits, but I've been diagnosing and working on cars for a good amount of time, so it comes natural to me. So your first goal should be finding a safe place to stop. Once you stop safely, you can poke around a little bit. Check the oil condition and look for abnormal color or debris. Shine some light on it to see if you see little sparkles or glitter-like material. If you do see debris, get a tow. If you cannot find the issue, don't just wing it and drive home. It's possible that the turbo can be leaking oil too, which can cause someone else to get into an accident or for your car to catch on fire. See my extinguisher video. Doing this can also cause a lot more damage to the car and your pockets. The risk definitely is not worth the reward. Get a tow. Now that the car is in the shop or garage, we can dig into it a little bit more. The first checks I'm going to do are cold ones, meaning that the car is cold and I'm not going to run it. I'm going to look for oil, coolant, and air leaks around the entire turbo, intake, and exhaust systems. The reason why I'm checking all these things is because a boost leak or turbo failure can reveal itself in these systems. I start with the easier inspections and systematically progress to more involved testing. Looking at the intake/pressure side of the turbo, I'm making sure that I don't see any hanging clamps or detached/broken hoses. Not all leaks will be obvious. Sometimes a hose will look tight, but when it's under pressure it will leak. When looking at the piping, you want to look for small traces of fluid or dirt. A pressure-induced leak will kind of look like someone painted the dirt or fluid on with a brush. This is because the pressure from the air blows across the surface, similar to a windshield when driving in the rain. And you can also grab the hoses and twist them to see if they turn. If they do, you know you just have a loose hose. Next, I'm going to look at my exhaust from the manifold back. I perform a quick inspection of the exhaust manifold, aka headers, to make sure I don't see any burn spots or fluids. A leaking manifold usually makes a good amount of extra noise, and since the car didn't sound abnormal when I was pulling into the pits, I'm going to move on to the exhaust side of the turbo. I'm looking for damage and wet spots around the gasketed areas. When a turbo fails internally, there is a chance of it leaking oil or coolant into the connected systems. Because exhausts are pretty dry from all the heat they accumulate, any extra or residual moisture can be seen pretty easily. This may be hard to spot if you have painted or polished components, so you can run your finger around the gasketed areas to see if you feel any moisture. Just remember that these are cold checks. And I'm going to look for damage, particles, and excessive moisture or fluids all the way around until the end of the exhaust. Another test to find leaks is called a smoke test. This is performed with a machine that produces lightly pressurized smoke. It can be used to diagnose various systems, but in this case, you want to remove your mass airflow or whatever metering system you have and have the smoke fill your intake system. This should reveal any leaks from the turbo compressor to the exhaust muffler and everything in between. You will know if there's a leak when you see smoke escaping from areas that should be airtight. The next thing to do is to check the wastegate. If the car won't build boost, the wastegate could be stuck open mechanically, pneumatically, or electronically depending on your system. To check it mechanically, I disconnect the arm from the actuator, and I make sure that the gate moves freely just by using my hand. To check the actuator itself, you can use a vacuum pump to see if the diaphragm is damaged or any of the hoses or anything have a leak. Now if you have an electronic system, you can do a cycle test and you should be able to tell whether your system is working correctly or not. Once I confirm there aren't any basic issues like a blown hose or a stuck wastegate, I'm going to take the car apart so I can access the turbo compressor and turbine for an in-depth inspection. I remove the intercooler and the nuts that hold the downpipe to the turbo. With the downpipe disconnected and pushed back a little bit, I'm able to get a finger or two on the turbine to test for shaft play. And as you saw, there is a lot of play for my turbo. If you don't feel any play issues, rotate the turbine to confirm it rotates smoothly. For a visual inspection, use a telescoping mirror, borescope, or remove the downpipe to get a look at it. To inspect the turbo compressor, you can remove the intake manifold and remove the turbo inlet piping, or you can loosen up the inlet pipe and squeeze a finger in to feel for issues, or you can snake a borescope into the inlet tube. In my opinion, a borescope is the easiest way to perform both of these inspections. If your downpipe has a test or a lambda fitting, you can just snake it through that. With an intake, just disconnect your air metering device and snake the borescope into that way. I knew my turbo was blown once I accessed the turbine, so I didn't have to move forward with inspecting the compressor side. Now that I know my turbo is blown, it's time to explore some options. Depending on your car's setup and your financial situation, access to a direct replacement turbo may be difficult. So here's some things you should consider as soon as you find out your turbo has failed. Did this failure damage other components? How long can you afford to have the car down? Do you want a new or used turbo? Do you want to rebuild it or have someone else rebuild it for you? Is a replacement or rebuild kit available? Do you want to upgrade or downgrade in terms of size? And why did the turbo fail? None of these questions have a quick and easy answer for most enthusiasts, mainly because there are several directions you can go with any of these questions. So let's address the first question because that will give us a full scope of the situation where we can find a feasible solution to the problem. Now my turbo failed in a certain way, but that doesn't mean your turbo will do so in the same manner. I'm going to list things that you should do in general and then I'll show you what I found. And if you haven't already, remove the turbo. In doing so, you will be able to inspect all the intake tubes and piping for damage and debris internally. And you should make sure that there are no bits of metal or debris in the tubing, intercooler, intake manifold, the heads, the combustion chambers, exhaust manifold, and the exhaust. Performing a cylinder leakage test is not a bad idea considering the failure could have affected the valves and or piston rings. I was surprised to find that my internals looked relatively clean. The compressor blades were rubbing on the housing, but it didn't break into pieces, which is great. What I found was a very fine baby powder like dusting of aluminum on some of the piping, which is the best you can hope for in this situation. If the blades had broken into chunks, I would definitely have to pull and disassemble the engine. Some may argue that I should disassemble anyway, but I decided not to because I believe the debris in the intake probably just passed through the combustion chamber with minimum to no damage, and let's hope that I'm right. Had I drove home with a failure, the damage could have been much greater, so that's why I say get a tow. On the exhaust side, some of the turbine blades were damaged and broken. Once I wiggled the turbine, I knew the bearing was shot as well. I'm not sure what came first, a broken turbine blade or the bearing, but I know either one could cause the other one to fail. So I sent the turbo to its manufacturer so they could diagnose the point of failure. And when I find out, I'm going to tell the team exactly what happened. For the rest of the exhaust, I used a magnet to fish out any particles that didn't get blown out, and it really wasn't that much. Knowing that the bearing was damaged, I knew the oil would be tainted with metal. So I drained the oil and it was not great. I have a magnetic oil plug, so I caught a good amount of large debris, but the oil was still sparkling in all the wrong ways. Now that I know that I have metal in my oil, I have to clean it out. Since the turbo was removed, I was able to squirt some oil into the oil return piping that goes directly from the turbo to the oil pan. And this is a crude way to wash down any debris that may have been stuck to the tube walls. With the drain plug and oil filter removed, I poured some fresh oil into the filler neck to wash down what I could. Now I strongly recommend removing the oil pan and cleaning it out thoroughly along with the oil pickup. I also removed the oil filter that is in the turbo inlet line, which was surprisingly clean. This was a good sign because if I did find metal in this filter, that would mean the metal circulated throughout the engine. After the turbo was in and the car was back together, I performed an oil change, placed magnets on the oil pan and filter, and I let the car idle for about 10 minutes. After that, I removed the magnets and performed another complete oil change. I reinstalled the magnets and then I drove the car for 10 miles and then performed another complete oil change. Each oil change, I monitored how much metal was in the oil and on the plug. Surprisingly, there wasn't that much debris in the idle oil change, which was the first one. So the other two were more precautionary actions, which I'm okay with because you do not want metal in your oil. Now I will perform another premature oil change for good measure because I'd rather spend $150 in oil filters and changes versus rebuilding an engine. Now don't get me wrong, building an engine can be fun, but not when it's because of a failure and not when you have to pay for it. Now when it comes to figuring out what your options are, it's really up to you and your preference. I will say that having a second car opens up your options significantly, and I covered that in my beater video, so check that out. For me, I knew I didn't want the car to be down longer than a couple weeks, and that is the problem. The shorter the downtime, the less options you will have. I also had a feeling that my original turbo was going to take a while to get back to me, and I couldn't get exactly what I wanted, so I found a good substitute. Okay team, so remember to like, share, and subscribe because it helps to keep these wheels turning, as does the aspiration to never stop learning. How can we possibly grow if we are not learning? You can't. So I wish you all well, and with that being said, stay tuned and thanks for watching.